Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, where we'll be talking about how to make a measurable DE&I impact through YouTube ads. Today's webinar is sponsored by Pixability. I'm Danielle Moore, Senior Manager here with Adweek's Content Studio, and I'll be your host. Before we get started, I do just want to take a few minutes to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's event and is familiar with the features of our platform here. Today's webinar should go somewhere in the 35 to 40 minute range, after which we will have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for one of our speakers today, just use that Q&A tool right beneath the video window on your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can after the end of the presentation. Also, it's definitely not too late to invite your colleagues to join us today. We sent a final reminder email around 15 minutes ago, and in there you can find a link to the webinar registration page that you can share with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to join us live today, but if they can't, please note that today's webinar is being recorded and they can always catch that on-demand version. In fact, we're going to be sending everyone a link to that on-demand version later today around 4 p.m. Eastern, so keep an eye out for that. And if you would like a PDF of today's slides, you can find those in the event resources area right beneath the video window on your screen as well. And as always, if you enjoy today's webinar, be sure to check out the full calendar at adweek.com/webinars, which is also linked below. And also in that event resources area, you can find a link to our resource library where we have new guides, white papers, and other content added regularly. So if you're looking for other ways to stay sharp, be sure to check all of that out. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We're very happy to be joined by Will Thomas, SVP Brand Partnerships at Culture Genesis. Will crafts strategies that captivate audiences through culturally relevant storytelling, precision-targeted media, and innovative influencer marketing. He has led campaigns for PepsiCo, Ford, T-Mobile, Hulu, and Universal Pictures. We're also pleased to welcome Chelsea Jenkins, Senior Director, Cultural and Inclusive Marketing at Kellanova. Chelsea is a nationally recognized thought leader in EDI and ESG. Her efforts have directly contributed to Kellanova being recognized as an exemplary company in these areas. We're also pleased to welcome Gordon Bach, SVP, Culturally Inclusive Media Lead at Starcom. Gordon leads inclusive investment at Starcom, working to diversify media spend across the agency and advance supplier diversity. His 15+ years of experience in marketing includes positions at media agencies, entertainment networks, and startups focused on creators and gamers. And finally, we're pleased to welcome Teresa Go, VP, Head of the Inclusive Media Initiative at Pixability. A seasoned YouTube expert, Teresa manages Pixability's partnership with Google and other major platforms. She also leads the Inclusive Media Initiative, a landmark program that represents the largest network of self-identified diverse YouTube creators in the world. All right, we've got a lot of great content to dive into today. So without further ado, let me bring our speakers up on screen. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will turn things over to Teresa.
Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate the introduction. We are excited to get this thing kicked off. I'm going to do the shameless plug from Pixability. We are a technology company, the only technology company focused on YouTube and the only company globally certified for both measurement program, the YouTube measurement program for brand suitability and contextual targeting, and also content insights. And selfishly, I do lead the Inclusive Media Initiative, which Danielle called out in our bio. And this is our exciting opportunity to talk about how our technology doesn't do all the work here. Our creators that we sign up for the Inclusive Media Initiative self-ID for the diverse communities that they are a part of. And this all sits on top of our platform, on top of Pixability, on top of Google, excuse me. We have the most YouTube data. We have a lot of scale outside of including our inclusive media program and outside of that with our Pixability contextual segments. And our team uses our own technology to build the most advanced performance campaigns on YouTube as well. So diving right into our agenda for today, we want to talk about how we got here, why we're having this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why on YouTube we're having this conversation. We'll like to talk about the current state and how planners and media professionals in general think about this space for DEI perspectives. And we'll talk about some of the challenges the executives we have here on this webinar might face in the market and things that we've overcome, and that will help you as well. Hopefully at the end of this, have good action items that you can take home. Great. We'll jump right into how we got here. this isn't new information for anyone, but there is an ongoing systemic issue. And we want to try to address that. And we've had a lot of, at least from the Pixability perspective, a lot of brands and advertisers come to us asking for how we can make a difference in the media space. And it really a catalyst for us from our advertisers coming in asking was the George Floyd tragedy. This really accelerated the conversation with media around making it more inclusive. And of course, we don't have it listed here, but the pandemic, dramatic effect on all of us. I'll just briefly touch on these, but essentially during the pandemic, we had the rise of AAPI hate crimes. This one's near and dear to me. I'm married to a Filipino man and we have children, and it became such a personal conversation for us. And being in technology, we've got the rise of all the AI biases and huge backlash from advertisers and just not knowing how to handle this new world that we were living in. And a lot of brands and agencies making pledges to change it. And I want to pop this, how we got here, over to the other webinar folks here. If anybody wants to chime in on their experience on how we got here.
Yeah, I can jump in. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Thomas, SVP of Brand Partnerships at Culture Genesis. We're the largest Black-owned YouTube network and publisher. But I think you brought up a really interesting point, Teresa. DEI and systemic racism has really been a big issue within our country for many, many years, and that's really impacted, not just the culture, but it's also impacted like our ad industry. Obviously, DEI is a really important conversation topic right now, and from the lens of a publisher and network, it's really, really important to make sure that our creators are included into media buys, and really just making sure that there's a certain level of responsibility and equity across advertisers, agencies, and publishers alike. And I think YouTube is a great platform for brands and advertisers to kind of find a home to reach diverse audiences, but also diverse industry and media partners as well. But like I said, I think starting with the systemic issue is really, really important. And then obviously George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter really accelerated the conversation. So again, it was a pivotal time in culture. This actually launched a very big movement within our company, Culture Genesis, which is primarily, our mission is to empower diverse owned publishers and creators and help them grow their audience, help them earn more revenue, but then also allowing advertisers an opportunity to authentically communicate with these audiences. And so, I think this is a very pivotal moment. We'd love to hear from you, Gordon or Chelsea, from your POV.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this has been a long-standing issue, and this work didn't just begin in 2020, but I think it did shine a light on, what are companies doing internally? Companies had to look at themselves at what are their blind spots where they haven't been inclusive or equitable. And we saw consumers really voting with their wallets of I want to know what these companies stand for and that I'm spending money with companies that are advancing these types of issues that disproportionately affect me. So we had to see, how do we have a responsibility to serve in the marketplace that we profit from? And let's act accordingly. So definitely a pivotal time and a lot of progress since.
Yeah, and I think a big piece too is also spotlighting these other groups that maybe have not had the attention in prior instances, and I think that is something that is also equally important too, to ensure that even when it comes to media or marketing, looking into beyond just the Black AA, US Hispanic communities, but the AAPI community, the LGBTQ plus community, our disabled communities, veterans, et cetera. So these are all these various groups who have been marginalized, and having the ability to also spotlight these other groups because they are equally represented in our US makeup. So all of these areas are really have gotten to our today's arrival of where we are and how we're tackling making sure that representation is across the board.
Absolutely. I think that one of the reasons we're all here is to hear about how we can have this conversation and be very targeted about it. Selfishly, Pixability believes that YouTube is a really great platform where we can have a lot of these conversations. Creators today, the diverse creators that we work with, are absolutely engaging with their community on YouTube. This is not only important to us, in the industry, but also this is where the viewers are. YouTube, the Washington Post recently came out with this piece where they said YouTube is the most consequential technology in America. And they highlighted a lot of the reasons why it is that. We see it as a place where we're streaming a lot of this content that is about these communities that we're engaging with, that the creators that are making it are on the biggest screen in our living room. This is a place where young people and everyone can go search and find the content that they're looking for that is about their community. And when we talk about AI biases, YouTube is the data that they use to build ChatGPT. It's part of that training set that has been going into that technology. So it's definitely impacting the landscape a lot more than we can see on the outside. And this really is for everyone. But when we think about our multicultural communities, there's some great stats here that we've seen from Nielsen, where we know everyone's watching this content on their TV. They're streaming YouTube. It is their prime time. It's what they're leaning into. And we know specifically, if you're looking for multicultural audiences, this is the place. The YouTube viewer penetration, you can see these eMarketer stats on race and ethnicity viewership on YouTube. This is really where the communities are leaning in and consuming content. And we've also learned from Nielsen too that some of the Black audiences feel misrepresented in media. So, I'm curious, Will, if you can chime in on that. How are you guys at Culture Genesis looking at the Black audiences and working with the creators that cater to them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question and a good segue. I mean, YouTube is definitely a prime destination for eyeballs, right? Culture Genesis, we're essentially the largest Black-owned digital video network and publisher in the U.S. on YouTube, and that is verified by ComScore. When you think about household reach from a publisher or YouTube network perspective, the chart on the right of the slide just kind of gives you an idea of like the sort of scale that we have in terms of helping advertisers, get in front of multicultural audiences at scale. And so, when we think about, our true value in the market to advertisers, we're really a gateway to diverse Gen Z and millennial YouTube audiences across, a variety of different interests, whether it be music, gaming, beauty, family, lifestyle, sports, and more. And so, while many folks may have not heard of Culture Genesis, the brand, but you probably have heard of countless creators who identify as Black and brown that sit within the Culture Genesis network. The likes of Kai Cenat or Cam Newton, all sit within our YouTube network. And, again, we have the ability to help brands get in front of, some of this, very engaging, diverse targeted inventory. And so, I think it's a really good conversation to have because I know a lot of brands are trying to figure out how do they even start when it comes to, DEI on YouTube. And so, we like to think we're a great place to start with that conversation again, since we are minority owned and SMDC certified. And so that actually brings us to, I think if we go to the next slide, and I'll propose this to the broader panel, but how do brands and advertisers who are new to incorporating inclusion into their marketing mix on YouTube and other platforms, how do they actually start? And from my perspective and, the perspective of, Culture Genesis being a minority-owned publisher, I think it really starts with advertisers being clear and transparent around their organization's priorities around inclusion and setting goals around those priorities. For instance, if economic equity and helping to close the gap of, economic disparities within the media industry is a goal, then you need to approach it from, a diverse owned perspective. And what I mean by that is, through YouTube, advertisers can execute pre-roll media buys on YouTube directly with minority-owned companies like Culture Genesis, because we have direct access to, to run media across our entire network. And so that includes both reserve and or programmatic advertising. So that's diverse owned, right? And then I think the second is diverse targeting, right? So this is another form of inclusion targeting, right? Advertisers can also target diverse audiences by running media across content that aligns with multicultural consumers. And so I think it really starts with advertisers being transparent with what their inclusion priorities are. And again, when it comes to content itself, specifically if you're targeting diverse targeted audiences, just making sure that your creative is inclusive to ensure that it resonates with diverse audiences is another area where I think brands should focus. So curious to hear your take on that, Gordon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big piece, and this is, I think any media person, any agency or brand marketer, it really starts with understanding your consumer, right? The consumer, what are the insights there? What can we get from so much rich data that's now available, especially as it pertains to all the pipes that feed into this and sales data, all that kind of great stuff. What information can we extrapolate from those areas to understand where are consumers spending time? Where are there areas that we're doing really well? And where are there areas that we can improve upon? So I think understanding that element first and foremost will be the best start to really incorporating inclusion into your overarching mix. From there, it's really about the behavioral patterns, right? When it comes to diverse audiences and holistically all people, we're not monoliths. There's so many different facets about what make us us, and understanding those nuances, understanding those little attributes, I think are ways for us to really start meeting the audience where they are, where they're consuming content. And YouTube is a really interesting space for that because of the fact that there is so much content there that is being developed by people who look like us, who represent who we are, who are doing so many different things that we want to see. And the best part about it is that it's up to you, the consumer, to choose what you want to consume. So I think those are really like the starting points, I think, in terms of where brands and advertisers can begin their journey in being more inclusive in their overarching media mix, et cetera. But we'd love to hear what Chelsea thinks too.
Sure. Yeah, I can touch quickly. So I think, you're perfectly designed and built for the outcome that you want. So when I look at this question, I think from a brand perspective, like we really had to look at the teams that were working on this. Are they reflective of the consumers and communities that we want to touch? Because we want to bring those inclusive perspectives to the work. It also has to be the structure and the processes. So are our teams really integrated to execute on this? Is the process inclusive, where we have those intentional touch points upstream in front of the briefing process to make sure that thinking is threaded throughout and through execution? And then our partners that are engaged in the process have the same thinking and standards that we do when it comes to inclusivity and what's necessary to reach a broader audience. So I go back to maybe at a macro lens, the structure, the process that has to go in, and the mutual understanding of the outcome you want.
Awesome. Sorry, go ahead, Gordon. I was going to just bump it over to you if you want to talk about this. Yeah.
Oh, no, not at all. I think from there, even from just the overarching landscape approach, how we're kind of viewing the, and we'll really touch upon this, the diverse owned and diverse targeted kind of two areas that you can really start leaning into. And then even within that and how we're approaching at Starcom, there's kind of 4 areas that this really is our opportunities for us to dive into. And we kind of broke it out. You can see here on the bottom, diverse owned and non-targeted, diverse owned and targeted, diverse targeted and non-diverse owned, and mass platforms and diverse targeted, which is where YouTube really falls into. What's intriguing about the last platform is where a partner like a Culture Genesis, where they are diverse owned, you're on the platform, but you're actually funding and giving the opportunity and the resources to a company that is minority owned, the ability to flourish. And I think these are areas that we're really trying to lean into and understand. But the important part is that this whole ecosystem that exists here really needs to work together. It is not a choose one only adventure type of approach. It really is all areas kind of singing in harmony together to really understand and to reach these consumers, because they don't only consume content in one channel or medium. They're really across the entire spectrum and board. So this is kind of one way that we're really viewing this landscape and how we're approaching it here at Starcom, which is phenomenal, and really proud of the work that we're doing to really increase supplier diversity and putting dollars into diverse owned entities. And then there are really the audiences that we're trying to hit upon here. The key takeaway is that they all want to be seen, and they all want to consume content that resonates with them directly, right? And we did a lot of research, a lot of insights from Publicis holistically on these various consumers, and kind of where they're spending time, where are their areas that they really want to, where there are areas that we can really kind of lean in on a little bit more so. And just a quick breakdown of just like how, like, you know, the Hispanic, the Black AA, and AAPI Asian Americans, where we see kind of areas where they're popping, right? And even a slide earlier that we touched upon, YouTube really does kind of cover the whole gamut. There is opportunities for all of these different cohorts to reach them in various touch points. So I think this is a really key area for us to really, again, understand the audience, understand what their behaviors are, and then making sure that we're authentically kind of speaking to them in a manner that resonates with them in the most meaningful way ultimately. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Chelsea to kind of talk a little bit more about Kellanova and their journey over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can double click a little bit into what I've been referencing here. So we're really looking to do right and do good. So do right for these communities, but also do really good for the business. And I think this is like table stakes now. We all know that there's also an incredible business opportunity that it's an imperative to tap into because of the population shifts that we've seen here. And so Kellanova has a focus on this, but there's a broader industry-wide challenge that we're trying to solve for that leads to more equity inherently. And I mentioned the inclusivity that we need to see on the teams that actually, are executing this work. And when I look at the marketing representation from an industry perspective, you can see on the bottom left there, for African Americans, 7.2% representation versus the total population being 12.1%, and Hispanic marketing representation 8.9% versus the total population being 18.7%. So there is a discrepancy here and deficiency in diverse representation on the teams that are executing the work. And so when I say it needs to be reflective of the communities we serve that bring that thinking, that's something that as an industry, we really need to solve to bridge the gap so that we can organically be more inclusive. So we look to embed ED&I across the business in that way. So it's not bolted on, but fully integrated into the entire ecosystem from a people perspective, how we go to market, and also our external partnerships. So if you go to the next slide, this just highlights quickly some of the progress that we've made in that approach. So in the first piece, when we think about the people that make up the ecosystem of Kellanova, it's making sure we have an inclusive mindset. We had to dig deep on cultural intelligence and making sure we're building capability in that space and instilling that mindset and extending that to our partners, our agencies as well. Evolving our go-to-market strategy from innovation, like we have to have the right foods, the right formats to even put at the center of this creative and this messaging. So, foods that authentically resonate with a broader set of consumers. We're integrated with the brand teams upstream. We're integrated with commercial strategy and media and integrated marketing to make sure that's pulled through across the funnel. And lastly, on the far right, what Will was talking about, the accountability piece, having really firm goals that we're actioning against, having those benchmarks as to what is the business opportunity that we're looking to capture and where we're looking to increase inclusivity. So we have these scorecards that we leverage with a partner called Catalyst, where he digs into our agency partners, our brands, and really looks at, are these entities built and designed for inclusive outcomes? Do they possess the attributes to execute really effective engagement for multicultural consumers? And it is a objective take, built around industry benchmarks and what great looks like. But we can, again, look at ourselves and see how we're making progress in this space and hold each other accountable and hold our partners accountable to make sure we're all abiding by the same standards here. And if you go to the right or to the next slide here, I'll just quickly touch on a high level what that strategy looks like from a media perspective and full funnel. So first, that balance of the economic inclusivity with reach and relevance. I mentioned the balance of doing right and doing good. So are we developing solutions for those underrepresented audiences at the center? Again, so it's not bolted on, but everything that we create is with multicultural at the center. And we're working with suppliers and partners like Genesis, like Pixability, like Starcom, that can help us craft strategies to grow the business, but restore that equitable and partner prosperity as well. And make sure that that's sustainable for our ecosystem, that we're creating ad content that is really going to resonate with the broader set of consumers. And then Gordon talked about the media landscape, but knowing that investment with diverse owned media has the greatest impact on awareness, and also debunking, if you invest in diverse owned media, is that just going to reach diverse owned? These are real conversations that we sometimes have to have of, there's an amazing halo effect when you lead with multicultural insights, when you lead with the majority, what is now the majority at the center of the insights that are driving your strategies. It drives the total market and drives brand favorability amongst everyone. So it helps with that reach, relevance, and again, economic inclusivity, but it hits those key brand health metrics. And then engaging with diverse audiences in culture and context. So we have a model at Kellanova called breadth and depth. And so with breadth, you're building this inclusive brand equity message up top. This is something that might have mass market appeal. It's anchored in those brand and multicultural consumer insights. But then you can pull it down in depth with the right messaging, with cultural relevance, with the right media channels that we access through partners like Genesis and Pixability and Starcom. So we're showing up at the right place in the right time with also the right creative, which is where we get help with our creators and our influencers that can help drive that authenticity. And then the last two, guidelines to select and evaluate and measure diverse partners. So we just look at, when we're evaluating those partnerships, how does it align with the verticals and passion points that we want to connect our brand to with that target audience? Does it align with capability and brand safety? Is it a credible and trusted voice that helps us deliver on equity? So we're pouring back into that community that we're looking to reflect. And then lastly, set unique goals for Kellanova brands. This is critical because it's something that we have to be able to have visibility from a leadership level. We have to have that top-down support and have clear benchmarks against the diverse certified, diverse classified, diverse endemic that we're working towards, and what great looks like for us, and setting that benchmark high. And so we set those goals internally, and we have regular quarterly check-ins as well with our agency partners to make sure that in their contracts, in their MSAs, where they are obligated as well, that's tied to their bonuses and their ratings, that they're also meeting those benchmarks and goals.
Thanks, Chelsea. That's awesome context to hear from a brand. The one thing that I just want to point out is that you're working, with these creators across the brands. You're engaging with them on YouTube and on their channels. And one thing that Pixability has seen is that YouTube creators that engage with brands and that have an authentic relationship with those brands, that drives the most brand loyalty. That drives the most engagements. We just see the most lift positively across the board when all of those things line up, as you've suggested here that you guys are working on. I love to see this. Moving on, we have another question that, as we think about what you just shared with us, you really showed us the map to success for the Kellanova brands. as we have our listeners here on this webinar, what can they take away today? What tools and metrics do you think that our listeners today should be looking at and evaluating when they think about their DEI initiatives across YouTube? And Will, I'm gonna bump this one to you and just hear a little bit about what it's like when you work direct with a creator.
Yeah, great. No, so I think this slide's really interesting because, Kaisenet is really a cultural phenomenon right now. And, he's a YouTuber, he's a content creator, he's a Twitch game streamer, but his YouTube channel happens to sit within the Cultural Genesis YouTube network. And this is a quick snapshot of the amount of scale his channel has alone, right? 1 billion monthly impressions, 179 million monthly video views, 12 million watch time hours, almost 12 million subscribers. And so, back to your original question, like how can advertisers, on YouTube monitor and evaluate the impact of their DEI initiatives? Well, one of the ways that we're approaching this from Culture Genesis is actually taking, an even deeper dive in terms of monitoring the level of economic impact that your ad spend is having at the creator level. And so what that means is if you look at Kai and his channel, and this is, estimated based off of a 3-month or a quarterly performance through the media buys that we've been able to execute with our partners, we've been able to drive, roughly 1.2, million in earned revenue for Kai, right? And so giving brands an opportunity or this level of granularity, can happen across whether it be YouTube reserve inventory, where we have the ability to reserve outright the inventory across our network, or through programmatic. And that's a big part of our exciting partnership with Pixability, because a lot of brands also want to be able to reach audiences through, programmatic means as well. And so, we're able to do that powered by Pixability's tech. And I think what you mentioned as well, Teresa, is really important, because on our dashboard, all of the creators and publishers that are in the Culture Genesis YouTube network can go in at any given moment and see which advertisers are running media across their channel. So not only are you fostering this sort of new level of visibility from the creator perspective, but we're also providing that level of granularity to brands. And I think what we're able to do ultimately is identify a certain level of brand loyalty from the creator, because they know now which brands, want to run on their channel. And then, ultimately, I think that's going to create, and this is where I think the industry is going, it's going to create an environment where brands and creators can have a more direct relationship, and or being able to expand beyond just, media. There may be co-branded opportunities with creators, but I think really just getting a granular level of understanding of where some of these advertisers' ad spend is actually going. And we provide this across all the channels in our network. And so I think this is a good next step in terms of how brands can kind of really quantify and understand where that spend is going.
That's awesome. That transparency, I think, is super valuable. I feel like a lot of the creators that are diverse that are on YouTube aren't the creators that you see in those banners talking about the top YouTube earners. So I think that there's a lot of room for growth with the diverse creators to catch up. And one area that we have seen this in is the racial pay gap. We actually see that diverse creators aren't making as much money with their influencer platforms that some of their counterparts and the white influencers are. And so this is something that hopefully partners like Culture Genesis and Pixability's Inclusive Media Initiative, it's a way where you can like funnel money directly to diverse communities and to those creators that are really passionate already about products and services that brands have out there. We do this with the Inclusive Media Initiative, and we focus on a lot of these diverse communities that are underrepresented in those top stats across the board for creators. And so that's, one way where we're trying to drive equitable investment in through media into these specific communities. And I'm curious to hear if either Gordon or Chelsea, if you guys could share about some creators that, you've worked with and some diverse communities that you've invested in on YouTube. Yeah, is there any like a sponsorship or anything like that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a platform called Black History Every Month, where we look to engage specifically diverse creators and leverage their authenticity and creativity to tell some of our brand stories. And then we look at, the balance of, we can use certain tools to reach these intended audiences, but we really need those partnerships to engage authentically and actually have them walking away with a changed behavior or perception to get that lift. And so even if we go back to the tools that you mentioned, specific tools, we leverage Ipsos CAM to measure that. We leverage SIM as well, which is the Cultural Insights Impact Measure, to identify what is the impact and effectiveness of that creative and the cultural insights they infuse in the ads and programming to help us be more relevant. So those are two tools they can take away today to help with that engagement piece.
Yeah, and I think,
awesome.
and I think going back to the question earlier too, as well, regarding even metrics, right? I think part of it that, as an agency person, a lot of what we do is built on metrics using benchmarks, et cetera. Sometimes we just start a brand new benchmark or a brand new metric period, right? For if we're talking about reaching a brand net new audience for a advertiser or a client who has never really played in this space, right? And so I think it would be almost unfair to use historics because historics haven't been built yet. So I think that's another area of kind of recognizing that we can't always use past learnings when the past learnings won't be a fair level playing field to a brand new group. So I think that's something to also remember as well sometimes, because we can get wrapped up in the idea of using historics over and over again. But then when we start something net new, we need to build from the ground up. And I think that's another area that, as a more of a reminder to everyone, that it isn't always, we can't always use the past as a means to gauge whether or not this was successful. So something that I talk to a lot of my clients about quite a bit, especially in places that they haven't done before or that they haven't worked in before. So I think that's a really important piece to remember.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful, especially if, a brand hasn't invested in a specific community yet. We get a lot of requests for things like, a brand lift benchmark on YouTube. And if you're starting with net new creative and net new products or something new, I think that's wonderful to start fresh and let it breathe on its own and create its own momentum there. I wanted to see if there was any other comments on this, or we can dive into our last section, making sure that our advertisers on the webinar have some ideas to take along with them. What do you guys think our next steps should be to ensure that investments are being equitably distributed to these diverse content creators out there? Are there some practices that you've already enlisted at your respective companies?
Yeah, I think one piece of it is, and I touched upon this a little bit earlier as well, is that we're looking at the U.S. makeup. I think is one way to see where are the opportunities for growth, which is really all facets, all groups, cohorts, et cetera, are growing at a massive rate, which is phenomenal to see. I think ensuring that we're also knowing that the majority of diverse groups are amongst the U.S. Hispanic and Black AA. I think the API, LGBTQ+, and these other communities that maybe are not as focused upon are also being part of this consideration set when it comes to looking at creators, looking at looking at their experiences to draw upon, because they are speaking to their audiences directly, right? And I think that's an area that we can really improve upon ultimately. I think there was a lot of there's a lot of division right now in our society, and I think strengthening and ensuring that we are actually funding these creators so that they are able to, have a livelihood, but also speak to their audiences in a really authentic fashion, and ultimately that to me is something that I see a lot of potential in having a more equitable approach for our ecosystem and landscape.
I agree,
Yeah.
Gordon. I guess when I think about like future proofing the business, you really do have to think about all of these segments. Like, Black and Hispanic might be the largest, but Asian Americans are the fastest growing, and they're going to continue to grow. And when I think about LGBTQ plus and the generations that are emerging, like 20% don't identify with a sexual orientation. And so if you think about future proofing your business, you really need to start now in that total market approach of making sure you're validating your insights across all of these segments that they can resonate universally. And I think to this question, it's really been for us bringing the right partners to the table to help with these challenges, because it has been a challenge for us to track diverse spend. Even though we have these goals and we have these intentions, we need the numbers to know how we're moving the needle. So to have partners like the ones on the call today to help reflect that back to us is really important, because we were to the point where we were trying to create opt-in forms ourselves, like, just voluntary forms of self-identifying to help us with that tracking, to make sure that we were being equitable and where we needed to push harder. So to have these systems in place helps quite a bit.
And I would just say, just
Absolutely.
to kind of piggyback off the both of you guys. I mean, I think you said it well, Chelsea. Like, you have to set unique goals for each brand, but then internally, I think brands and agencies have to have a certain level of accountability to follow up on that, right? Making sure that, okay, if you have a certain level of, whether it be investment that you want to spend with minority-owned or diverse-owned publishers, creators, stay true to what that is and, reach those goals. Look for partners like Culture Genesis, look for partners like Pixability that can actually help you guys, reach those thresholds. Because just being in the space and working with a number of brands, we're working with, General Mills, Mars, Ford, you name it. And a lot of these brands have DEI or, diverse audience commitments. And, I think it's just a really huge opportunity if brands have a certain level of accountability to see things through. And so that would be one of my bits of feedback to just advertisers out there. And I know it's difficult to find minority-owned, companies that have the scale that can help you reach those thresholds. But again, Culture Gen and Pix are here to help you guys in that regard.
Yeah, I think when we first started the Inclusive Media Initiative, one of the learnings that I still have every day, but as creators log in and self-ID as part of a diverse community on YouTube, the write-in fields that they have, there's so many facets to diversity. I think Gordon's done a really good job hitting on a lot of the communities that we get a lot of top asks for. But a lot of these communities are overlapping in such beautiful ways where people might identify as 3 or 4 or 5, 6 different things. We had Bree Hall as a creator that helped us launch the Inclusive Media Initiative. And she really helped us push the boundaries for what sorts of questions that we were asking creators to share about themselves. And I think that it's really important to let people come as they are and bring their whole selves to their creator work that they're doing with these brands. And then also measure the impact. I think on the back end, where one thing that we've really enjoyed seeing in the reporting is that when a brand invests in the Inclusive Media Initiative, they can actually see how many dollars went to each community. And then they can track that against their goals. So they know what the spend was to Google, but then they also know what the creators take of that spend was. So there's this level of transparency that you see right into that community that you're investing in and seeing, okay, well, that creator is going to walk out their front door this morning and go buy a coffee at a local coffee shop. And so those dollars, those media investments went to a creator community and then are now going to that community that creator lives in as well. So you can really see the evolution of this conversation where the money is trickling down through every facet of it And it's really making an impact on these individual creators that maybe they haven't taken the step yet to like quit their day job and do this full time, and they're not huge, but they're going to get there one day. And we're going to help them do that with driving these really intentional media investments their way. So on that note, just looking at time, we have a couple of ideas of some takeaways that advertisers could think about next time they're planning some media investments on YouTube. And I'd like to open it up to the group. Are there any other areas where you want to dig in a little deeper here? These are some of the ones that we've identified as good starting points, kind of like a health check when you're doing your RFPs, putting them out there and making sure that you're being thoughtful and inclusive at every step of that media plan.
I think the piece that I've been speaking a lot with my clients about as well, and we touched upon this a little bit earlier too, Teresa, is this idea of intersectionality, right? And I think that's a big one. And you really touched upon that we are more than just one thing. Like, I am an Asian American person, yes, but I'm more than just that. And this idea that how do you start reaching these audiences and looking for, whether it's creators or looking for opportunities that really touch upon more than just this idea of this one sector, right? It's really more than just that. And I think that's really where the opportunity is growing more and more so, because we are getting more and more diverse. I think that's something as maybe not as quite a check mark per se, but something that we can look into, or something that, everyone here can kind of explore as well, in seeing when it comes to creators, when it comes to opportunities and searching for what makes sense for your specific brand or client. Are there places and spaces where you can play in that you find this unique subculture that exists? And I think that's a big one that I've been very keen on bringing to the table, because I think that's really where so much richness lies in a person, right? Especially as they create content and they're kind of reaching their followers and people viewing their content. That's such an interesting perspective to have, more than to have someone to really talk about all these multifaceted elements that make them who they are. So I think that's something to also keep in mind too.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so excited about that as well. And I think internally we're talking about it as like this full cultural identity, where, race and ethnicity is just maybe one facet of that. But like, what are the verticals and passion points and, beyond psychographics, like, what are the areas and territories within culture, the rituals, the traumas, the behaviors and celebrations that we should be plugging into and amplifying and creating space for? That's a trusted exchange, I would say. And so that's an area that we're leveraging a tool called the Culture Compass to dig into, of like, where does our brands even have the right to show up within that space that we want to build equity and build relationships with that way. And I hope to work with Gordon on that too, with Starcom after this, because I think we both have a passion for it. But I think he's absolutely right, evolving the way that we're thinking about this for sure.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, I think, you touched on trust, right? And I think earlier, Justin, you had mentioned, Kellanova has an initiative beyond Black History Month. And this is just a tip for the advertisers out there. And this is coming from a Black consumer as well as a Black executive in this space, to build trust and equity, specifically with the Black community. Running Black History Month campaigns are great, but we want to see you guys show up for us beyond just Black History Month. And so I was really glad to hear that Kellanova is leaning in that way. And again, I think that bullet may not be on this slide, but at Culture Genesis, we like to say Black History Month is every month. And so, that's another bit of insight from the target demographic.
Yeah, like, you have to have a 365 strategy for this, right? Like, if media is your largest line item on your budget, you better have a dedicated strategy for this. So I completely agree. It's 365. You're including insights that resonate with these consumers, not just that moment in time, right? That particular celebratory day. It's all the time. Yeah.
I think one thing that's not on here that I'm realizing is a big mistake is representation in the creative that we make for these ads. I think it's so important to have diverse communities represented in the ads themselves, in the actual video creative, such that the audience we're targeting feels like they're represented and seen. It's not always going to be a perfect match, right? But I think just trying to be more inclusive and creative is really important. And I felt like I just realized it's totally should have been called out on this slide.
Yeah, and I think we've seen from like a talent perspective, it kind of bolted on at the end sometimes of like, okay, we've done this whole thing. Well, now let's throw a Black person in the spot or whatever. And now it's resonating. And, you know, it might reach Black consumers, but it's not actually going to engage unless you're thinking about it up front before the brief and throughout the process of like, okay, is this really authentic? Have we verified? Have we brought people through with the lived experience to validate and to add context? So that's where that authenticity comes through of like, talent is great and that level of representation, but it goes so much deeper than that in the creative process.
Absolutely. I love that. And I've seen that firsthand in our inclusive media initiative when advertisers come with content that's really thoughtful and meaningful and derived for the community that they're then reaching with the inclusive media initiative. The whole cycle is awesome. And the lift there and the results is palpable. So I love seeing that across the board.
Yeah, you're right. The metrics support it too, Teresa. You know, you'll see a higher video completion rate. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Well, I want to bring Danielle back in from Adweek to get us to the next part of this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for those insights. Such a rich discussion. I didn't want to cut us to Q&A too quickly, but we do have a couple questions here, so I want to make sure we can get in as many as possible. To our audience members, please know that if we don't get to your question today, we always make sure they get forwarded over to our speakers so they have the opportunity to reply offline. Just a couple really quick reminders from Adweek as well. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later today. Keep an eye out for that email with the recording in it. And you can also grab a copy of today's slides from the event resources area. All right, let's jump into some of these questions here. So our first question, this is a good one for you, Teresa. Are creators in the initiative seeing the benefit from joining? How is it trickling down to them? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, definitely. Creators that have signed up and self-identified as part of the Inclusive Media Initiative can see exactly how much revenue that they're driving, and they can also get an insight into the advertisers that are investing on their channel as well. So that's all transparent both to the advertiser and to the creators that are a part of the initiative.
Thank you for speaking to that. We have a question here for Gordon. Someone asks, are you seeing your clients are increasingly looking for diverse creators and audiences on YouTube? Talk a little bit to us about the trends there.
Yeah, I think all clients now are looking to or try to figure out how do they reach diverse consumers, like just period. And I think that's such a unique question because there's so many ways to approach that. But I think on YouTube specifically, you know, with partners like Genesis, with Pixability, there's ability to really say, hey, we want to reach these certain audiences. We know, you know, especially when they're self-identifying, that helps in so many different layers and facets because of the fact that they're saying, I am of this background, I am of this cohort, I am of this whatever it may be. And I think that is an opportunity where we're really able to start leaning in. But every client now is requesting and is, you know, they're really trying to figure out in their strategies, how do they reach these consumers authentically and in a manner that is really resonating with their community. So I think that is something that we're seeing consistently day in and day out, and working with someone like a Chelsea at Kellanova who is living and breathing this and able to bring new opportunities to her and her team in terms of how we reach these consumers is really amazing. But YouTube is really obviously a massive area because we know these audiences are spending a lot of time there. So that's really the best part about it.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for diving a little bit deeper into that element. And speaking of Chelsea and Kellanova, we have a question here for you, Chelsea. Someone asked, for Kellanova, how are you able to help all the brands under Kellanova's umbrella? And certainly we saw some great examples on the slides there today. Follow the company's mission and vision for DEI. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think it is the balance of the mindset shift as well as the process shift. So like we're thinking differently, but also the way that we're designed is differently to support this change. And then you also take any subjectivity out of it, of whether or not you think it's the right thing to do. I think too, I mentioned some of the accountability measures that we had, the scorecarding that we do every year, and bring in a third party that we socialize very broadly and we share up with leadership to make sure we continue to move that forward. And then setting really aggressive goals and standards for us to meet, especially in the spend space. And then Gordon's response, I mean, the partnership with Starcom has been incredible to help move our organization forward. The thought leadership that they have brought and the passion and investment that they've made. We just actually had this training session beginning of the year called Consumer of the Future, and it was all rooted in this. And first, taking a dive from a mindset perspective of understanding biases, understanding lived experiences, celebrating differences. That's the foundation. Understanding the opportunity and the business imperative behind it as well. But then how do we actually unlock this, which was bringing forth a lot of what we talked to today. I mean, a lot of our brands are just like, we want to do it. Just tell me what to do. Like they have good intentions, but they really just need to understand the how and have that really strong partnership with our agencies and with our internal team. So we're lucky to have Gordon and Starcom's partnership there too.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions today. I'd like to thank our speakers as well as our sponsor, Pixability. Some final reminders here from Adweek. Be sure to grab those slides from the event resources area and keep your eyes peeled for the on-demand link, which will be available later today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.